sir.
Thanks, Mike.
Evening, ma'am.
Merry Christmas,
Where'd that come from?
I'm sorry.
stopped breathing.
How's Carter?
This is his son. This is his mom. Brains are rational. It's medicine balls. We blood. They call it
Please join us. That's not protocol, sir. He's coming with us. Find Connor. Go, go, go.
Forbes turned the most protected address in America into a symbol of failure. Olympus has fallen. That phrase is more than a dramatic title. It is our first clue. Olympus is not simply the White House. It is the belief that certain places, institutions, and people are too powerful to collapse. The moment that belief is challenged, the film opens a disturbing compartment. What protects a nation when its symbols of protection can no longer protect themselves? Welcome to the Film Box, where we do more than follow explosions, count victories, or decide whether an action film is entertaining. We open the machinery beneath the spectacle. We look at the choices that create tension, the details that hide in plain sight, and the human fears concealed inside the largest cinematic disasters. Every film is a box. We open it together. Today, that box contains Olympus Has Fallen, a political action thriller built around an almost unthinkable image. The White House transformed from the center of American authority into a confined battlefield. That premise sounds simple. Put one capable man inside an impossible situation, surround him with danger, and let survivors take over. Yet, the movie is doing something more calculated. It asks you to believe in a fortress, then makes you watch the idea of that fortress disintegrate. Our clue is the word fallen. It suggests more than physical destruction. Something can remain standing and still fall. A building can keep its walls while losing its meaning. A leader can remain alive while losing control. A protector can continue breathing while believing he has failed the person he was supposed to save. The film repeatedly separates appearance from function. Uniform suggests loyalty, walls suggest security, titles suggest authority, and protocol suggests control. But what happens when each reassuring surface hides a weakness? That contradiction gives Olympus Has Fallen its energy. The danger is not only that an enemy has arrived. The greater fear is that the system has trusted its own image for too long. Strength has become something displayed rather than tested. Protection exists as ceremony, routine, and confidence until a violent interruption forces everyone to discover whether it can actually work. The film turns national security into a pressure chamber, but it also places personal guilt inside the chamber. One man's unresolved failure becomes inseparable from a much larger collapse. At the center is Mike Banning, played by Gerard Butler. He is not introduced as an untouchable legend. He is defined by responsibility and by the emotional weight of a decision that cannot be undone. That makes him more interesting than a simple action machine. His physical ability matters, but the film's real mechanism is his need to become useful again. Every obstacle tests more than his training. It tests whether a person who believes he failed once can trust himself when failure becomes unacceptable. That is why the movie's scale works so effectively. The national emergency may be enormous, but the emotional engine remains personal. Mike is not protecting an abstract monument. He is confronting the memory of what protection costs. President Benjamin Asher is not presented only as a political office. He is also a man whose public strength cannot erase private pain. Their relationship gives the spectacle a human hinge. Without it, the film would be only noise, fire, and collapsing architecture. With it, every act of resistance carries the possibility of redemption. As we open each compartment, we will follow the idea of security from symbol to mechanism. We will examine how Antoine Fuqua creates a sense of invasion, how editing and sound turn familiar spaces into hostile territory, and how the film uses controlled geography to make a massive attack feel frighteningly close. We will look at the performances that keep the story grounded, the decisions that make the tension work, and the weaknesses that become harder to ignore once the adrenaline settles. We will also confront the film's politics without letting them swallow the filmmaking. Olympus Has Fallen arrived during a period when American action cinema was again testing national vulnerability through images of damaged institutions and threatened leaders. The movie uses fear, patriotism, grief, and retaliation with very little hesitation. Sometimes that directness gives it enormous force. At other moments, it simplifies people and conflicts so aggressively that the fantasy becomes difficult to separate from the anxiety behind it. No major turns will be revealed yet. For now, keep your attention on that first clue. Olympus is presented as a place, but the film gradually treats it as an idea. If the idea can fall before the building does, then survival requires more than reclaiming rooms or defeating an immediate threat. It requires restoring belief in the people operating beneath the symbols, and that leads us toward the question pulling the entire film forward. When every official layer of protection fails at once, who still knows how to act and what personal wound makes that person refuse to stop? The answer is not the person with the highest rank, the largest command center, or the most advanced technology. Olympus Has Fallen places its faith in the man the system has already pushed to the edge. Mike Banning knows the machinery of presidential protection, but he is no longer standing at its center. That distance becomes the hook. The person who understands the fortress best is also the person the fortress has decided it can function without. Most action films try to conceal the nature of their central disaster. This one announces it in the title. You already know Olympus will fall. The suspense comes from watching confidence turn into confusion and then asking whether one trained individual can operate after an entire institution loses its rhythm. The film does not invite you to wonder if the attack will happen. It makes you wait for the exact instant when preparation stops being useful. That creates a particularly sharp kind of tension. The White House is familiar even to people who have never been near it. Its shape communicates order. Its rooms represent continuity. Its guards, gates, cameras, and procedures suggest that every threat has already been imagined. Antoine Fuqua uses that familiarity against you. He does not need to explain why the location matters. He only needs to disturb the picture you already carry in your mind. The gripping element is the speed of that disturbance. Safety does not fade gradually. Normality is interrupted. Authority struggles to identify what it is seeing, and defensive decisions begin arriving moments too late. The film stacks confusion upon confusion until a building associated with command becomes a place where information cannot move fast enough. Power still exists, but it is separated into rooms, screens, titles, and incomplete reports. That separation is essential. A nation may possess overwhelming strength, yet strength means little when it cannot be directed toward the right point at the right moment. Olympus Has Fallen builds excitement by turning coordination into a scarce resource. People can see pieces of the crisis without understanding the complete mechanism. Those outside possess authority but limited access. Those inside possess knowledge but limited support. Mike occupies the narrow space between those failures. He is compelling because his advantage is not in vulnerability, it is familiarity. He understands routines, human behavior, and the difference between what a security system is designed to do and what frightened people actually do under pressure. The movie treats knowledge of the building almost like a second weapon, but the deeper advantage is psychological. Mike can act while everyone else is still adjusting to the fact that the impossible has become real. Put those details together and the film's central mechanism becomes visible. The attackers are dangerous, but disbelief makes them more dangerous. Every delayed reaction gives them another opening. Every assumption that the situation remains controllable allows the situation to grow. The story understands that surprise is not merely the first stage of an attack. Surprise continues for as long as the defenders refuse to abandon their previous understanding of reality. Mike has already lived through that kind of rupture on a personal level. His life changed because one terrible moment demanded an immediate choice. Since then, he has existed in the emotional space after the decision, carrying the knowledge that training cannot guarantee a perfect outcome. When the national crisis begins, he recognizes something others do not. There is no time to preserve the appearance of control. You either respond to the world as it is, or you become trapped inside the world as it was supposed to be. That gives Gerard Butler's physical presence a purpose beyond intimidation. He moves like someone trying to close the distance between failure and usefulness. His agency does not come only from duty. It comes from a private need to prove that one irreversible moment does not have to define every moment that follows. The film surrounds him with national symbols, but his motivation remains painfully human. He wants another chance to be the person others can depend on. The hook therefore operates on two levels at once. On the surface, you are watching an enormous institution become vulnerable. Beneath it, you are watching a damaged protector become necessary again. One falls as the other rises. The building loses control while the discarded agent regains direction. That reversal is clean, immediate, and emotionally satisfying, which explains why the premise can hold your attention even when it pushes plausibility toward its limit. It also changes the meaning of the title. Olympus suggests gods looking down from an unreachable height, yet this film drags power into hallways, hidden passages, locked rooms, and desperate communication channels. Leaders become human bodies with limited choices. Security becomes a sequence of mechanisms that can break. Heroism becomes the willingness to move forward without certainty that anyone is coming to help. But before the first barrier fails, another compartment must be opened. A premise this direct depends heavily on how it was shaped behind the camera. The casting, the race to bring the concept to the screen, the recreation of Washington far from Washington, and Fuqua's approach to physical intensity all influence the film you eventually see. Understanding those decisions reveals why Olympus Has Fallen feels heavier, harsher, and more enclosed than its simple premise might suggest. The first production clue is that Olympus Has Fallen began with a screenplay by Clayton Rothenberger and Catherine Benedict, their first produced feature screenplay. Millennium Films acquired the project in 2012, and Gerard Butler became attached as both its star and one of its producers. That combination matters because the movie feels designed around a very specific kind of leading presence. Mike Banning needs to appear capable enough to survive the premise, yet burdened enough to prevent that capability from becoming empty wish fulfillment. Butler's casting gives the film an immediate physical language. He does not have to explain that Mike has lived through demanding situations. His posture, movement, and restrained aggression communicate experience before the action accelerates. At the same time, Butler can make silence look uncomfortable. That becomes important because Mike's emotional damage is expressed less through long confession and more through the way he occupies ordinary spaces after being separated from the work that once defined him. The casting therefore shapes the character's mechanism. Mike does not begin as an ordinary man discovering hidden courage. He begins as a trained protector whose confidence has been interrupted. Butler plays that distinction clearly. His body remembers what to do even while his personal life remains suspended by guilt. When the emergency finally demands everything he knows, his return to action feels less like a transformation and more like a locked compartment suddenly opening. The second fact is Antoine Fuqua's involvement as director and co-producer. By 2013, Fuqua had already demonstrated a strong interest in stories about authority, loyalty, and men forced to operate inside morally pressured systems. His approach here is direct. He treats the premise with more weight than playfulness, resisting the temptation to make the White House takeover feel like an elaborate adventure. The material is exaggerated, but the camera behaves as if the consequences are immediate and severe. That choice alters the emotional temperature. In another director's hands, the same screenplay could have become lighter, cleaner, and more self-aware. Fuqua instead emphasizes confusion, impact, smoke, damaged architecture, and the frightening loss of coordination. The action is not presented as a smooth exhibition of skill. It often feels like order being violently replaced by fragments. You are pushed toward the experience of the crisis before being invited to admire how the hero responds. Fuqua's seriousness also protects the central relationship. Mike's commitment to President Asham might have felt purely procedural if the film treated both men as symbols. Instead, the earlier connection establishes a sense of personal duty that survives Mike's professional removal. Fuqua understands that an action hero becomes more compelling when his mission is attached to a wound. The national stakes generate scale, but personal responsibility supplies momentum. A third production fact places the film inside an unusual Hollywood race. Olympus Has Fallen was developed while Sony was preparing White House Down, another 2013 action film built around an assault on the same iconic building. The two projects were produced independently, yet their similar concepts made timing and distinction unavoidable concerns. Olympus Has Fallen reached American theaters first, arriving several months before its larger-scale cinematic neighbor, knowing that changes the way you see its creative identity. Olympus Has Fallen could not rely only on novelty because another film was preparing a comparable promise. It needed a different texture. Where White House Down would lean toward a broad blockbuster partnership and a more playful adventure rhythm, Fuqua's film shows harder edges, tighter spaces, and a protagonist driven by professional guilt. Its competitive advantage was not the building itself, it was the severity of the experience inside it. This also explains why the movie moves with such urgency. It presents the premise as a concentrated survival thriller rather than a leisurely tour through presidential spectacle. The White House may be enormous as a symbol, but the storytelling repeatedly compresses it into corridors, command rooms, stairways, and hidden routes. The concept becomes intimate through confinement. That distinction allows the film to resemble a siege story even when the consequences extend far beyond the walls. The fourth major fact is that the production did not primarily photograph this Washington crisis in Washington. Filming took place in and around Shreveport, Louisiana. Sets constructed sections of the White House, controlled exterior spaces, and digital extensions were combined to create the illusion of the American Capitol. A first-floor exterior section could be physically present, while upper architecture and the surrounding city were completed through visual effects. That production method becomes easier to notice once you know it, but it also explains some of the film's visual personality. The White House is recognizable without feeling completely open. It is often perceived in selected pieces rather than as a freely explored real location. Physical walls give the actor something solid to move through, while digital additions enlarge the crisis beyond what the production could construct. The result sits between tactical enclosure and national-scale destruction. Sometimes the illusion is convincing because movement, debris, lighting, and sound prevent your eye from studying the image for too long. At other moments, the digital work reveals the film's budgetary limits, yet even those limitations affect the style productively. The movie rarely invites calm architectural admiration. It wants the building to feel unstable, obscured, and partially unknowable. Smoke and darkness are not merely decorative. They help merge constructed space with digitally expanded space while reinforcing the sense that a familiar landmark has become unreadable. The snowball opening provides another example of this hybrid process. According to visual effects accounts from the production, green screen photography and digital environments were used extensively to build the dangerous winter conditions and surrounding landscape. The sequence feels different from the later siege, but it establishes the same underlying principle. Apparent control can be erased by a sudden environmental shift, and a protector may be forced to choose before complete information is available. That knowledge makes the opening more than an expensive prologue. It acts as a technical and emotional rehearsal. The production uses artificial conditions to create a situation defined by physical helplessness. Later, the film enlarges that sensation from one vehicle and one impossible decision to an entire institution. The scale changes, but the dramatic mechanism remains consistent. Security fails when time becomes shorter than the procedure designed to manage it. The fifth fact is the film's reported production budget of roughly $70 million. That is substantial, but the story demands military hardware, a recognizable government landmark, a large ensemble, extensive destruction, controlled sets, and significant visual effects. The budget therefore had to create the impression of a national catastrophe without operating at the scale of the most expensive studio spectacles of its period. You can feel the filmmakers solving that problem through concentration. Instead of making every moment larger, they reserve scale for selected images and allow interiors to carry much of the tension. Communication becomes action. A locked entrance becomes a strategic obstacle. A dark passage can create more suspense than another wide shot of destruction. The budget may limit illusion in places, but limitation forces the movie to keep returning to Mike. Where Butler's physical performance can provide impact without requiring the frame to grow endlessly. These 5 production details connect cleanly. First-time feature writers provide a direct, high-concept structure. Butler gives that structure a body and an emotional wound. Fuqua supplies gravity. Competition with a similar project pushes the film toward a harsher identity. Louisiana sets and digital construction turn an unreachable landmark into controlled cinematic territory. A disciplined budget encourages the story to move between spectacle and confinement. The box is now beginning to reveal its mechanism. Olympus Has Fallen was not created simply by imagining the destruction of a famous building. It was created by finding ways to make power feel physically close, emotionally damaged, and suddenly breakable. With the production machinery visible, we can open the next compartment. What kind of film emerged from those choices? Who stands inside it? And what promise does it make before the deeper spoilers begin? Released in 2013 and directed by Antoine Fuqua, Olympus Has Fallen is a political action thriller starring Gerard Butler as Secret Service agent Mike Bunning, Aaron Eckhart as President Benjamin Asher, and Morgan Freeman as Speaker of the House Alan Trumbull. The supporting cast gives the crisis additional weight. Angela Bassett plays Secret Service Director Lynn Jacobs. Melissa Leo appears as Secretary of Defense Ruth McMillan. Rick Yoon embodies the central threat, and Radha Mitru plays Mike's wife Leah. Those names reveal the film's structure before the plot does. Butler supplies physical momentum. Eckhart represents leadership under pressure. Freeman gives the outside response a calm center. Bassett communicates urgency without losing authority. Leo adds defiance and emotional force. Mitchell reminds the story that Mike's choices reach beyond his professional identity. Each performer occupies a separate compartment of the emergency, allowing the movie to move between personal danger, national command, and private consequence. The genre is often described simply as action, but that label misses the specific mixture. Olympus Has Fallen combines a siege thriller, a rescue mission, a political crisis, and a redemption story. It borrows the enclosed survival structure associated with films like Die Hard, then replaces the commercial tower with America's most recognizable political residence. That substitution immediately raises the emotional volume. A threatened building becomes a threatened national image. The film exists partly because that premise can be understood in seconds. One sentence creates the entire commercial promise. An enemy force takes control of the White House and the displaced Secret Service agent becomes the best chance of responding from within. The concept is bold, easy to market, and naturally cinematic. Yet simplicity is not the same as emptiness. A clean premise can become a powerful container when the character placed inside it has unfinished emotional business. At heart, this is a story about usefulness after failure. Mike has the skills required for a crisis, but his confidence and professional position have been damaged by a previous tragedy. His journey asks whether one decision made under impossible pressure should define the rest of a person's life. The film does not approach that question quietly. He buries it beneath alarms, tactical movement, political pressure, and physical danger. Still, the emotional question remains present beneath almost every action he takes. It is also a story about the difference between office and leadership. Formal authority moves through a defined chain, but a crisis disrupts that chain. People who normally issue commands may lose access to the information required to make them. People with no public visibility may become essential because they understand the immediate reality. Olympus Has Fallen repeatedly asks what authority is worth when it cannot reach the room where the decisive choice must be made. That is where our clue returns with a new function. Olympus represents elevated power, but the film keeps reducing elevation. Leaders are brought down to human scale. Protective systems become fallible mechanisms. The agent pushed away from the center becomes the person closest to the truth. Falling is therefore not only destruction, it is the removal of distance between the image of power and the vulnerable people carrying it. My spoiler-free verdict is that Olympus Has Fallen is an aggressive, highly effective piece of action filmmaking when judged by the experience it intends to create. It is tense, direct, and powered by a strong Gerard Butler performance. Fuqua gives the danger a sense of weight, and the film understands how to convert a familiar landmark into threatening territory. When it works, it moves with the certainty of a thriller that knows exactly what you came to feel. The limitations are equally clear. The political framing is blunt. Certain characters function more as symbols than as complete human beings. The mechanics of the takeover demand a generous suspension of disbelief, and the film sometimes treats intensity as a substitute for complexity. Its adversaries are written with far less depth than its hero, which narrows the moral and political landscape. Those weaknesses matter, but they do not completely cancel the force of the central experience. This is a film for you if you enjoy contained action thrillers, highly capable protagonists, rescue missions, political stakes, and stories where one person must think faster than a larger system. It will especially connect if you appreciate the harder, less comedic brand of the genre. The movie does not pause often to reassure you. Once its main mechanism engages, it wants pressure to keep building. You may connect less strongly if you require strict realism from security procedures, nuanced international politics, or antagonists whose motivations receive equal dramatic attention. The film values urgency over subtlety and momentum over careful probability. Accept that contract and it becomes easy to follow. Reject it, and every convenient decision may pull you away from the tension. What makes Olympus Has Fallen worth opening is not that it reinvents the siege thriller. It does not. Its achievement is the conviction with which it relocates that structure into a symbol everyone recognizes. It takes ceremonial spaces, official titles, and protected routines, then tests whether any of them still matter when the normal order disappears. Before we examine the camera, editing, and design choices that make the test feel physical, we need to enter the film through sensation. The opening does not begin with national destruction. It begins with warmth, routine, movement, and a fragile impression of safety. What you feel during those first minutes determines how hard the later transformation lands. The first feeling Olympus Has Fallen creates is not fear, it is familiarity. Mike Bunning is close enough to the presidential family to joke, train, and move around them without the stiffness normally associated with political ceremony. President Usher is introduced not only as a head of state, but as a husband and father. The atmosphere carries warmth, routine, and the easy confidence of people who believe the protective structure around them is functioning exactly as intended. That opening choice is smarter than beginning with immediate danger. The title has already promised collapse, so the film gains nothing by pretending peace will last. Instead, it uses calm to establish what collapse will cost. Mike's relationship with the family feels personal before it becomes professional. He is not guarding a distant office. He is protecting people whose habits he knows and whose trust he has earned. The early training exchange between Mike and Asher is particularly useful. It allows Butler to demonstrate control strength without presenting Mike as a performer waiting for applause. He understands when to push and when to stop. The scene also makes the president physically present. Asher is not yet trapped behind a desk or reduced to a voice transmitted through official channels. He moves, reacts, competes, and briefly exists outside the weight of office. Then the film shifts into winter. Snow surrounds the presidential motorcade, and the environment becomes both beautiful and threatening. White normally suggests purity or calm, but here it erases visual certainty. The road is darker, the night feels deeper, and the moving vehicles appear isolated inside a landscape that offers very little room for correction. You begin to sense that the protective machinery is entering conditions it cannot fully control. This is where the premise's first contradiction becomes emotional rather than political. Mike is trained to respond to danger, yet the crisis that defines him is not an enemy he can overpower. It is an accident unfolding too quickly for every life to be saved. His ability still matters, but ability cannot remove the cruelty of the choice. He must act without receiving enough time to create a perfect outcome. The sequence lands because it refuses to give Mike a clean victory. The rescue is inseparable from loss. In a few moments, the warm relationship established earlier becomes the source of lasting pain. The film does not need a long explanation of his guilt afterward. You have seen the shape of the decision. You understand why survival itself can feel incomplete when a protector measures success by the person he could not reach. That is the moment that hooked me. Not because the event is unexpected, but because it gives the later action a necessary emotional foundation. A weaker version of this story would introduce Mike as a dismissed agent and provide his history through exposition. Olympus Has Fallen lets you experience the fracture first. When time moves forward and Mike is no longer beside the president, his absence has weight. He looks displaced because you have already seen where he believes he belongs. The film's atmosphere changes with him. The opening warmth gives way to institutional distance. Mike now works near the center of government without truly participating in its most important movements. He can observe the world he lost, but he cannot re-enter it. That position is emotionally precise. He is not completely exiled. Complete distance might allow him to heal. Instead, he remains close enough to remember his previous purpose every day. This is also where Butler's restraint becomes effective. Mike does not need to announce his frustration. You can feel it in the contrast between his physical readiness and the controlled routine of his new assignment. His skills have not disappeared, they have simply lost their channel. The film creates anticipation by showing unused capability before providing a crisis large enough to demand it. Because the title and marketing promise a major assault, you might expect the film to rush toward spectacle immediately. Fuqua does the opposite for just long enough. He creates an emotional debt first. The later emergency will not merely ask whether Mike can stop a threat, it will ask whether he can return to the relationship and responsibility from which tragedy removed him. The genre expectation is therefore slightly redirected. You arrive prepared for a muscular political thriller, and the film gives you grief before combat. It does not become a quiet character study, but it borrows enough emotional gravity to make the action personal. Mike's eventual movement toward danger is not simply heroic instinct. It is the response of someone who has spent too long imagining what he would do if responsibility called his name again. The first 10 minutes also establish the movie's attitude toward consequences. Safety can disappear without warning. Training can improve a choice without making it painless. A correct decision can still destroy the person forced to make it. These ideas are much more interesting than the simple fantasy of an unstoppable agent. They make Mike capable, but not protected from emotional damage. There is another subtle effect at work. By beginning outside the White House, the film prevents the building from becoming important too early. The first fortress is not architecture. It is the trust between Mike and the presidential family. That trust is damaged before the national fortress comes under pressure. The personal fall happens first, allowing the later institutional fall to echo it on a larger scale. The mechanism is now clearer. Mike's story and the building's story move in opposite directions. He begins close to power and is pushed away. The building begins as a distant symbol and is pulled into immediate danger. When those paths finally intersect, the film has already prepared you to understand why Mike cannot remain a passive observer. What makes the opening difficult to look away from is this sense of stored energy. You know what Butler can do physically. You know what the title has promised. You know Mike is carrying a wound connected to the very people who may soon need him. The story has placed a trained man beside an approaching disaster and created just enough distance between them to make their collision inevitable. The next compartment shows how that collision is made visible. The color temperature framing, camera movement, editing rhythm, lighting, and production design do not merely decorate the crisis. They transform recognizable space into unstable territory and convert Mike's return to action into a change in the film's entire visual language. The visual strategy of Olympus Has Fallen depends on contrast. Conrad W. Hall's cinematography presents official space as polished, symmetrical, and controlled before breaking that order into unstable fragments. Alley compositions give architecture room to breathe. Lines feel balanced. Characters fit comfortably inside recognizable institutions. Once the crisis takes hold, the image loses that ceremonial calm. Frames become tighter, movement becomes more urgent, and the building stops looking like a monument designed to be admired. Symmetry is especially important because political architecture communicates authority through balance. Doors align with corridors, furniture defines rank. Flags and official seals create visual certainty. Fuqua uses those elements as an initial grammar of control. When the action interrupts that grammar, overturned objects and damaged surfaces mean more because you remember how carefully ordered everything appeared. Production design becomes emotional evidence. Disorder is not simply present, it is measured against the image that existed before it. The exterior photography operates differently. Wide images establish national scale, but they are rarely allowed to remain peaceful. Motion cuts across them. Smoke obscures familiar shapes. Figures become small against architecture, making individual defenders appear overwhelmed by the size of the event. The White House remains recognizable, yet its visual meaning changes. It is no longer a distant emblem in a postcard composition. It becomes exposed territory. Color has completed that transformation. The opening winter sequence leans into core blues, pale whites, and deep blacks. The palette creates emotional distance even while the characters are personally close. Warmth exists through behavior rather than environment, which makes the surrounding cold feel like a warning. Later, neutral government interiors absorb harsher shadows, emergency illumination, and the dirty amber of damaged spaces. Respectable colors become contaminated by the crisis. Fuqua avoids making destruction visually beautiful for too long. Fire and sparks provide strong contrast, but the surrounding frame often remains heavy with gray, brown, black, and muted green. The texture feels more industrial and heroic. This is not a bright comic book version of political disaster. The image wants weight. Even when the visual effects are noticeable, the cladding tries to bind them to a world of dust, concrete, metal, and smoke. Camera movement also separates different forms of authority. In command spaces, the camera often works through controlled coverage. It observes faces, cleans, maps, and reactions, allowing information to become the source of tension. Inside the contested building, movement feels more physically attached to Mike. The camera follows his direction, checks corners with him, and allows foreground objects to hide portions of the frame. You do not always receive a complete view because he does not possess one. That limited information is crucial. A tactical trailer becomes less effective if the camera reveals every threat before the character can discover it. Olympus Has Fallen repeatedly uses doorways, walls, darkness, and changes in depth to divide the image into possible danger zones. Empty space becomes active. A corridor is not simply a route, it is a question. The frame teaches you to inspect its edges. The lensing frequently keeps physical distance compressed inside interiors. Backgrounds feel close enough to threaten the foreground, and characters have limited escape routes within the composition. Mike may be highly mobile, but the rooms around him remain restrictive. This creates a productive contradiction. The hero moves with confidence through an environment that visually denies freedom. Editing by John Refoa gives the main assault its distinctive force. The sequence is constructed through accumulation rather than one isolated surprise. Each new problem arrives before the previous one has been fully processed. Cuts move among civilians, defenders, political leadership, aerial danger, and Mike's clown-level perspective. That pattern enlarges the event while preserving a personal anchor. The rhythm is fast, but not uniformly fast. Refoa allows brief moments of recognition before accelerating again. You see enough to understand a defensive response, then the cut reveals why that response is insufficient. This creates a repeated mechanism of expectation and reversal. The film shows you a possible solution, interrupts it, and forces the characters to adapt. Momentum comes from the destruction of plans. Reaction shots carry unusual importance within that rhythm. A distant command center cannot participate physically, so faces must communicate the expanding scale of failure. Morgan Freeman and Angela Bassett are often asked to absorb information before responding to it. The edit gives their restraint value. Panic would make the room feel powerless too early. Controlled concern suggests that authority is still fighting to reorganize itself. Inside the White House, transitions are less formal. Mike's actions connect through direction and purpose. A movement begins in one shot and is completed in another, keeping his momentum intact even when the camera angle changes. This makes him feel efficient without requiring every encounter to become an extended display. The film is not interested in elegant choreography for its own sake. Technique remains attached to survival. Lighting divides public power from hidden power. Official rooms are designed to be seen. Their illumination exposes faces, emblems, and carefully arranged space. Restricted areas and service routes operate through lower light, stronger contrast, and narrower visibility. The deeper Mike moves into the building's unseen structure, the more the film suggests that survival depends on knowledge of what exists behind the polished surface. That choice connects directly to our clue trail. Olympus appears strongest when viewed from outside, but its real mechanisms are concealed. Wiring communication systems, access routes, security controls, and human decisions support the visible symbol. The cinematography gradually transfers attention from the grand exterior to those hidden mechanisms. The film opens the monument like a machine and places Mike inside its damaged interior. Sound design strengthens nearly every visual decision. Large impacts have weight, but quieter sounds often create the sharper suspense. Footsteps. Radio interference, distant alarms, controlled breathing, and sudden silence make the environment feel occupied even when the frame appears empty. Noise defines the scale of the crisis. Silence defines proximity. The editing frequently removes sound at the moment when Mike needs information most. This gives listening a tactical function and prevents the action from becoming one continuous wall of volume. When sound returns forcefully, the contrast restores impact. The technique allows the film to remain intense without depending entirely on increasing loudness. Production design completes the illusion by making official rooms feel distinct while connecting them through a coherent institutional texture. Decorative authority exists beside practical security. Elegant surfaces hide controlled access points. The building seems simultaneously historical and mechanical. That dual identity serves the story perfectly. It is a national residence, but it is also a system. Together, these techniques convert a familiar location into a visual puzzle. Framing limits knowledge. Editing destroys certainty. Color stains ceremony with danger. Lighting exposes the difference between public image and hidden operation. Sound turns unseen space into a threat. The film's craftsmanship may not always be invisible, but its purpose remains clear. Make the fall of Olympus feel like the breakdown of a machine, while one man searches for the remaining controls. Now, the visual mechanism is open. The next step is to follow the causal path through it, not every room or confrontation, but the essential chain of desire, obstacle, choice, and consequence that turns Mike's private need for redemption into the film's central engine. Mike Penning's central want is established before the national crisis begins. He wants to recover the sense of purpose destroyed by the winter accident, but he has no clear path back. 18 months later, he remains employed by the government, close enough to observe presidential activity yet removed from the protective detail that shaped his identity. His marriage to Laya gives him a life beyond work, but even she can see that part of him remains trapped inside the decision made on that bridge. This creates the first causal link. Mike's guilt prevents him from moving forward, or his reassignment prevents him from proving that he still belongs. He cannot undo the past, and the institution has no reason to gamble the president's emotional well-being on Mike's return. The separation is understandable, which makes it more painful. No villain created this part of his life. It grew from a tragedy in which every available choice carried loss. The story then introduces a diplomatic meeting between President Asher and South Korean Prime Minister Lee Tae-woo. On the surface, the meeting belongs to the ordinary machinery of international politics. Beneath that surface, hostile operatives have positioned themselves close to the center of American authority. Kang Yang-suk enters under a protected identity, using trust and confusion as openings. The assault outside and the betrayal inside are coordinated to overwhelm separate layers of security almost simultaneously. What matters is not the operational detail, but the principle behind it. The White House is not defeated by one enormous force pressing against the front. It is weakened by multiple assumptions failing together. Defenders respond to what appears to be one category of danger while another category is already moving within the protected structure. The attack succeeds cinematically because information travels more slowly than the threat changes shape. Mike sees the emergency from outside his former position. He is not ordered into the center of events, and no official authority has restored his status. He moves toward danger because his understanding of responsibility exists independently of his current job title. This is the first decisive choice in his redemption path. He stops waiting for the institution to declare him useful and acts on the knowledge that usefulness is required. That decision turns his apparent weakness into an advantage. Because Mike is no longer part of the active protective formation, the attackers have not planned around him as a central obstacle. He knows the building, the procedures, and the people, but he initially exists outside the picture of control. The discarded agent becomes an unpredictable variable. The system's earlier decision to remove him accidentally hides its most capable remaining defender. Inside the crisis, President Asher and senior officials are forced into the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. A space designed to preserve leadership during catastrophe becomes a chamber of confinement. That reversal is central to the clue trail. Every protective mechanism contains a possible second function. A hardened room can keep danger out, but once compromised, it can also prevent the people inside from escaping. Kang's immediate demands appear political. He uses the captured leadership to pressure the United States and to force decisions involving American military power on the Korean Peninsula. Yet, the film gradually reveals that the visible demand is another compartment. It keeps outside leadership focused on negotiation while Kang pursues access to a deeper strategic system. His operation depends on making authority respond to the threat he displays rather than the objective he conceals. Outside, Speaker Alan Trumbull assumes presidential authority. Morgan Freeman's calm delivery matters because Trumbull cannot afford to react emotionally to every new shock. He must preserve continuity while confronting the possibility that any intervention could endanger the hostages. Secret Service Director Ling Jacobs supplies Mike with a crucial line back to organize command, but communication does not erase the distance between them. Trumbull possesses legal authority. Jacobs possesses institutional knowledge. Mike possesses immediate access. None can solve the crisis alone. The story gains tension from that incomplete distribution of power. If Mike acts without outside coordination, he may misunderstand the larger danger. If the command center acts without trusting Mike, it may sacrifice the only person capable of changing conditions inside. Cooperation therefore becomes a test of belief. The government must place extraordinary trust in someone previously removed from its most sensitive duty. Mike's first objective is not to defeat every attacker. It is to become a source of reliable information. He observes, communicates, and begins reducing the enemy's awareness of his movements. Each success changes the balance slightly, but it also increases Tang's need to identify and contain him. Mike is useful because he understands that control is informational before it is physical. The person who knows what the opponent cannot see has room to choose. A more personal objective soon emerges. Connor, the president's young son, is somewhere within the building. His presence gives Kang a potential method of pressuring Asher beyond political threats. For Mike, finding Connor connects the national crisis directly to the family he once protected. The mission is no longer only about rescuing a head of state. It is an opportunity to keep another member of that family from becoming the cost of an impossible decision. Mike locates Connor by thinking through the building as the child understands it. This is not simply tactical knowledge. It is relational memory. He succeeds because he remembers the habits, trust, and private understanding developed before his removal. That choice opens another compartment. Security is strongest when it is personal. Cameras and protocols can be studied from a distance, but a genuine relationship contains information an attacker may never possess. Getting Connor out of danger accomplishes more than one goal. It protects the child, removes an important source of leverage, and gives Mike his first meaningful correction to the past. On the bridge, he was forced to accept that he could not save everyone. Here, he reaches the person whose vulnerability could reshape every later decision. He still cannot erase his previous loss, but he can prevent that loss from becoming a permanent definition of who he is. Kang responds to Mike's interference by tightening pressure on the captives and manipulating the command structure outside. This is where the film's conflict becomes a contest between two kinds of control. Kang controls rooms, hostages, and visible threats. Mike controls uncertainty. He appears where he is not expected, removes pieces from Kang's system, and forces the attackers to redirect the attention away from their original timetable. The presence of Dave Forbes makes that contest more personal. Forbes once served within the protective world Mike understands, but he has chosen betrayal. His knowledge demonstrates that institutions do not fail only because outsiders are powerful. They also fail when trusted insiders decide that access can be converted into advantage. Forbes is the human version of the compromised bunker. Something designed to support protection has been turned against the people who relied on it. Mike's encounter with Forbes carries emotional weight because both men possess similar professional knowledge but opposite relationships to duty. Mike has been rejected by the system and still risks himself to defend it. Forbes once belonged to that system and now helps dismantle it. Their contrast prevents Mike's loyalty from looking automatic. He is not faithful because the institution treated him perfectly. He is faithful because his idea of responsibility survives personal disappointment. Outside command faces its own test when military leadership considers a direct rescue effort. The desire is understandable. Waiting appears passive, the nation needs visible action, and Mike's progress cannot guarantee safety. Yet the attempted intervention is based on incomplete understanding of the defenses now controlled by the attackers. The result is another painful demonstration that power without current information can become vulnerability. This failure changes the story's mechanism. Trumbull must accept that conventional force cannot simply overwhelm the occupied building. Mike, the unofficial element inside, becomes even more important. The chain of command remains necessary, but it must now support action it cannot fully supervise. That is an uncomfortable form of leadership. Authorize someone else to make immediate choices and resist the urge to replace uncertainty with a larger display of force. Kang understands the psychological value of public pressure. He does not treat the hostages only as bargaining tools hidden from sight. He uses fear, limited information, and staged appearances to influence decisions beyond the building. The conflict therefore takes place in perception as much as in physical space. If outside leaders believe time is disappearing, they become easier to manipulate. If the public sees national authority humiliated, the symbolic damage grows even before the final objective is achieved. Mike attacks that advantage by disrupting Khan's ability to maintain a complete picture. He makes the building less transparent to the people occupying it. Corridors and concealed routes become useful because Mike knows how to move through the difference between the official White House and its practical structure. The grand rooms belong to the attacker's visible takeover. The hidden mechanisms increasingly belong to him. Meanwhile, Kang seeks access to Cerberus, a highly protected system connected to America's nuclear arsenal. Multiple authorization codes are intended to prevent any single captured official from activating it. On paper, the arrangement represents distributed security. Under coercion, however, the separation of codes becomes a sequence of human pressure points. The system may be technically protected, but the people carrying its authority remain vulnerable. President Asher faces a brutal leadership problem. Refusing every demand may preserve strategic security while allowing people beside him to suffer. Giving ground may save an immediate life while moving Kang closer to a catastrophic objective. The film uses this tension to expose the limits of procedural certainty. No manual can eliminate the moral weight of choosing between present human pain and future national danger. Asher believes his own final authorization can remain beyond Kang's reach, so he permits other officials to surrender their portions rather than endure further harm. The decision is compassionate, but it also rests on confidence that the last barrier will hold. Here, the title's warning returns again. Olympus falls whenever confidence in one remaining protection becomes stronger than attention to the mechanism attacking it. Mike slowly recognizes that Kang's operation extends beyond the demands presented to Trumbull. The clues no longer fit a simple hostage negotiation. The positioning of the captives, the pressure for separate codes, and the attacker's willingness to sacrifice their visible advantages indicate a more disruptive endgame. Mike is not merely racing to free Asher. He is racing to understand the objective before Kang completes it. The consequence is an escalation in both directions. Kang reduces the time available and prepares to conceal his final movement. Mike abandons any hope of restoring order room by room and focuses on the path connecting the hidden objective to the president. Their strategies narrow toward the same point. One man is trying to turn the fortress into a weapon, the other is trying to recover the human being buried at its center. This is where Mike's redemption becomes complete in meaning even before the outcome is known. He began the film haunted by a moment when he could not save every life. Now he understands that protection does not mean controlling every variable. It means continuing to choose responsibility after certainty has disappeared. He is no longer trying to prove that he never fails. He is proving that failure did not remove his ability to act. The White House has now lost its public function, its defensive certainty, and much of its visible command. Yet the deeper structure still contains one moving source of resistance. Mike follows the clue through compromised rooms, false appearances, broken communication, and concealed purpose until everything points toward the final protected chamber. The building is no longer the prize. It is the mechanism Kang intends to use, and this is the moment the box opens completely. The film's greatest strength is Gerard Butler's understanding of what kind of hero Mike Bunning needs to be. He does not play Mike as charmingly invincible or amused by danger. He plays him as a man whose training takes over before his emotions can interfere. The performance is physical, but its effectiveness comes from intention. Mike rarely moves without a reason, and Butler makes every pause feel connected to listening, judging, or choosing. One scene proves this especially well: Mike's first meaningful communication with the command center after entering the White House. The people outside cannot immediately confirm his condition, his knowledge, or whether he can be trusted with the freedom he is demanding. Butler allows frustration to appear without letting Mike lose focus. He is not asking for emotional forgiveness. He is establishing value through accurate information. His return to relevance happens through competence rather than a speech. That is exactly right for the character. A dramatic confession would weaken the restraint established around his guilt. Mike repairs his identity by doing the work. Butler understands that redemption can be expressed through behavior. Every correct observation and protected life becomes part of the argument that his worst moment was not his final definition. Aaron Eckhart also gives President Asher more humanity than the role strictly requires. He projects authority, but his strongest moments arrive when command becomes emotionally costly. Asher must remain recognizable as a leader while being denied the physical power normally attached to his office. Eckhart communicates that tension through controlled resistance. The president cannot dominate the room, so he tries to control what his captors can make him surrender. Morgan Freeman brings a different kind of strength to Alan Trumbull. His authority comes from stillness. Where the crisis encourages everyone around him to accelerate, Freeman slows decisions down just enough to suggest thought. This matters because the command center scenes could easily become repetitive exchanges of bad news. His composure gives them shape. You feel the pressure increasing precisely because Trumbull is working so hard not to let it dictate every choice. Angela Bassett performs a similarly valuable function as Lynn Jacobs. She gives the institutional response emotional urgency without turning it into panic. Her belief in Mike is not sentimental. It is grounded in knowledge of his abilities and in the rapidly changing evidence he provides. Bassett makes communication feel active. She is not merely receiving information, she is translating Mike's isolated actions into choices the wider government can understand. Melissa Leo creates one of the film's most memorable supporting performances as Ruth McMillan. Her role embodies defiance under pressure, and Leo refuses to make that defiance ornamental. It feels costly. The character's resistance communicates that political authority is not only a title or a security clearance. It can also be the refusal to cooperate internally, even when external control has been taken away. The story construction works because it gives each major location a different dramatic function. Mike's interior path is about access and uncertainty. The emergency bunker is about coercion. The command center is about incomplete information and high-risk decisions. Leah's limited perspective reminds you that national emergencies are also private nightmares for families waiting outside the flow of official knowledge. These spaces do not merely alternate for variety, they create a chain of dependency. Information discovered inside changes decisions outside. Pressure applied in the bunker changes the time available to Mike. A decision made by command can either support his progress or create a new obstacle. The film keeps moving because each compartment affects another. That structure prevents the siege from becoming a collection of disconnected confrontations. Another excellent decision is making Mike's knowledge more important than raw force. He is physically formidable, but his real advantage is understanding how the building functions and how presidential protection thinks. This clean play repeatedly lets familiarity solve problems that strength alone cannot. This turns his previous relationship with the White House into narrative capital. His past is not only emotional background, it supplies the skills required by the present. Fuqua's direction is strongest when he communicates collapse through accumulation. The art does not depend on one impossible image. It builds through multiple failures, changing conditions, and responses that arrive too late. Each defensive layer appears capable for a moment before the next part of the mechanism reveals why it is insufficient. The sequence creates dread because the loss of control feels measurable. The visual treatment of Mike after he enters the building is equally effective. He is often framed against damaged elegance, formal interiors interrupted by smoke, debris, darkness, or abandoned objects. The contrast gives his mission symbolic weight without requiring the script to explain it. He is moving through the injured body of the institution he once served. The action also benefits from a refusal to make every encounter identical. Some moments are built around movement, others around waiting, misdirection, communication, or a sudden reversal of available information. Mike cannot solve every obstacle by charging forward. The film's most satisfying victories occur when he understands the opponent's assumption and uses that assumption against them. Jabber Morrissey's score reinforces the scale without completely overwhelming the personal story. Brass, low passion, sustained tension, and patriotic musical colors help the film operate on the level of national crisis. Yet, the score becomes most useful when it connects Mike's private determination to the larger emergency. His movement through a corridor can feel connected to the fate of the government because the music bridges individual action and institutional consequence. The sound design provides an even sharper tool. Radio voices, distant impacts, alarms, rotor noise, and sudden drops into quieter space make the building feel larger than what the camera shows. Sound gives Mike information while also reminding you that danger exists beyond his immediate frame. The unseen parts of Olympus remain active. The single most unforgettable sequence is the fall of the White House itself. It is not unforgettable because it is the most realistic portion of the film. It is unforgettable because Fuqua commits fully to the emotional violation of the image. Familiar grounds become exposed. Protective formations are overwhelmed. Command struggles to understand the scale. The American flag and the building's exterior stop functioning as untouchable symbols and become vulnerable physical objects. The sequence works as spectacle, but its deeper strength is structural. It completes the promise of the title early enough that the rest of the movie can explore consequence. Many disaster films delay destruction as though the image alone is the destination. Olympus Has Fallen treats destruction as the door into the real story. Once the building has been taken, the more interesting question begins. How does power behave after losing the appearance of power? The scene also confirms our clue. Olympus falls first as an idea. The physical structure remains visible, but its ordinary meaning has been reversed. The people who should control it are confined. The person officially removed from its protection is moving toward its center. Every reassuring relationship between title, space, and authority has been inverted. What the film does, brilliantly, is maintain clarity inside that inversion. You understand who possesses information, who possesses authority, who possesses access, and why none of those advantages is sufficient alone. The action may be heightened, but the dramatic roles remain keen. That clarity allows the film to move quickly without becoming emotionally empty. Still, strength creates expectation. The more convincingly the movie establishes its pleasure system, the easier it becomes to notice where logic bends, where characters lose dimension, and where intensity begins replacing development. Opening the compartment does not destroy woodpaths, but it reveals the cost of the film's relentless forward drive. The film's largest weakness is the number of security failures its premise requires at the same time. Any single vulnerability might be accepted within an action thriller. Olympus Has Fallen asks you to accept a long chain of them, each occurring with extraordinary precision. The attack depends on external defenses, internal screening, intelligence awareness, communication, and emergency decision-making, all breaking in ways that favor Kang's operation. That does not destroy the film because Fuqua moves quickly and treats each failure with conviction. During the first watch, momentum can carry you across many logical gaps. Once the immediate tension fades, however, questions accumulate. The White House is supposed to represent layered protection. If nearly every layer can be neutralized so efficiently, the story needs stronger explanation for how the attackers obtained such complete knowledge and access. Dave Forbes is meant to provide part of that answer, but his betrayal remains underdeveloped. The film establishes that he has crossed from trusted protector to collaborator without giving enough emotional or ideological substance to that transformation. Because he once belonged to Mike's professional world, he could have been a powerful mirror, a man who responded to disappointment by abandoning duty rather than recommitting to it. Instead, Forbes functions mostly as a mechanism that explains access and gives Mike a personal opponent. The idea is useful, but the character is thinner than the role deserves. A few carefully chosen scenes exploring resentment, compromise, or self-justification could have strengthened both the takeover's plausibility and Mike's moral contrast. Kang suffers from a similar lack of depth. Rikune gives him control, intelligence, and quiet menace, but the screenplay treats his history primarily as a reason for destructive revenge. His political anger is presented in broad terms, while his human contradictions receive little space. The result is an antagonist who can operate the plot effectively without becoming psychologically compelling. This matters because the film places international conflict at the center of its threat. When the opposing side is reduced to a narrow image of fanaticism and deception, the political world becomes flatter than the personal world surrounding Mike. The hero is allowed grief, loyalty, marriage, professional identity, and the desire for redemption. Kang is largely allowed purpose and cruelty. That imbalance makes the conflict easier to follow but less interesting to examine. The supporting characters are also used unevenly. Leah gives Mike an emotional life beyond presidential protection, yet she spends most of the crisis waiting for information. Vlada Mitchell brings genuine concern and intelligence to the role, but the screenplay offers her little influence over events. Her medical profession could have created a stronger parallel with Mike, two people trained to preserve life under pressure, separated by different sides of the emergency. Lynn Jacobs has more authority, but even she is frequently limited to receiving Mike's updates and defending his usefulness in the command center. Angela Bassett makes every moment count, which almost highlights how much more the character could have contributed. The movie has several capable figures around Mike, yet its commitment to the lone rescuer fantasy repeatedly narrows their agency. Mike's effectiveness eventually creates another problem. His competence is the engine of the film, but the balance sometimes moves too far in his favor. He adapts to injuries, limited resources, and changing conditions with remarkable consistency. The attackers may control the building, but individual encounters increasingly feel like steps toward an expected outcome rather than genuine uncertainty. A stronger middle section might have forced Mike into a more significant mistake, with consequences he could not immediately correct. That would connect more deeply to the opening, where one impossible choice permanently altered his life. Instead, his later decisions are usually validated quickly. The film speaks about failure through his past, while allowing relatively little failure during his present mission. Pacing is another mixed area. The initial assault is forceful because multiple crises escalate together. After the building falls, some bunker exchanges and command center reactions begin repeating the same emotional pattern. Kang applies pressure. Outside leadership considers options, and Mike interrupts part of the plan. The information changes, but the rhythm can feel familiar before the final escalation arrives. The visual effects have also aged unevenly. Interior often retains its weight because physical sets, controlled lighting, and close framing support it. Some large exterior images appear less convincing now, especially when digital aircraft, architecture, smoke, and destruction must occupy the same frame. Those moments create distance because the film's tone asks you to accept them as physically immediate. Still, imperfect effects are not the deeper issue. The problem appears when the image becomes too artificial to support Fuqua's otherwise grounded approach. A more stylized film could absorb visible digital construction. Olympus has fallen wants impact to feel heavy and real, so any weightless movement or inconsistent scale works against the chosen tone. The film's patriotic imagery can also become overly direct. Symbols are damaged, Authority is humiliated and resilience is emphasized with little ambiguity. That emotional clarity will work for many people, but it leaves limited room for questioning the systems represented by those symbols. The movie is interested in restoring faith more than examining whether that faith should change after the failure. None of these weaknesses makes Olympus Has Fallen ineffective. Most are costs created by its priorities. It chooses speed over procedurality, a dominant hero over a balanced ensemble, immediate threat over political complexity, and emotional certainty over ambiguity. Those choices produce a muscular thriller, but they also establish the exact areas where other films in the same genre become stronger or much weaker. That gives us the next compartment. Place Olympus Has Fallen beside Die Hard, Air Force One, White House Down, and London Has Fallen, and its particular identity becomes much easier to see. The clearest comparison is Die Hard, because both films place a highly capable, emotionally troubled man inside a building controlled by an organized hostile force. Each hero possesses local information unavailable to the people coordinating from outside. Each story turns corridors, elevators, communication channels, and hidden access points into parts of a moving puzzle. Yet the similarity reveals an important difference. John McClane survives partly because he appears ordinary. His vulnerability, improvisation, frustration, and humor make every victory feel earned through painful adaptation. Mike Banning enters the crisis with far greater training and institutional knowledge. He is less an unexpected survivor than a temporarily misplaced professional. That makes Olympus Has Fallen more forceful but less intimate. Mike restores the system from within. McClane remains suspicious of systems even while saving the people trapped inside them. The art also develops its antagonist through personality and performance. Hans Gruber can command attention without action, because his intelligence, vanity, patience, and adaptability create a complete dramatic presence. Kang is dangerous because his plan works and his control appears difficult to break, but the screenplay gives him fewer dimensions. Olympus Has Fallen raises the political stakes while reducing the psychological complexity of the rivalry. Air Force One offers the next useful connection. Both films transform a protected presidential environment into confined territory and place American leadership under direct physical pressure. Both use the president's family and national responsibility to test the boundary between private love and public duty. The central difference is where heroism is located. In Air Force One, the president becomes the active defender. Political authority and physical action occupy the same character. Olympus Has Fallen separates those functions. Asher must resist from captivity, Trumbull must govern from outside, and Mike must act inside. That division creates a more complex communication structure. No one possesses every form of power, so survival requires trust among people who cannot see the same situation. Air Force One is more interested in the fantasy of the president as personal action hero. Olympus Has Fallen is more interested in the protector who preserves the presidency. Mike does not need public recognition. His identity is built around proximity to someone else's importance. That difference makes his redemption quieter, even when the action surrounding it is louder. White House Down is the unavoidable comparison because it reached theaters in the same year with a remarkably similar central image. Both films imagine the White House captured and place one capable man inside as the institution's most effective remaining defense, yet their tones separate them almost immediately. White House Down uses humor, partnership, and broad blockbuster energy. Its hero and president develop a more playful relationship while surviving the crisis together. Olympus Has Fallen treats the building with heavier symbolic weight. Fuqua wants the takeover to feel like a wound. The darkness, harsher action, and emphasis on guilt create a thriller that takes its own political anxiety much more seriously. If you prefer lighter chemistry, larger comic relief, and a president who participates more directly in the physical adventure, White House Down may be the stronger choice. If you prefer pressure, confinement, and an almost relentless sense of national emergency, Olympus Has Fallen is the better fit. Neither is especially subtle, but they pursue different emotional contracts. London Has Fallen shows what happens when the Mike Banning formula expands beyond one building. The sequel increases geographic scale, places the hero and president together for longer, and turns movement through a damaged city into the central survival mechanism. It offers more of Butler's aggressive competence, but it loses part of what made the first film structurally satisfying. The White House gives Olympus Has Fallen a clear box. There is an inside, an outside, a hidden center, and a recognizable hierarchy of rooms. London is more open and fragmented. That expansion creates variety, yet it weakens the first film's puzzle-like relationship between Mike and a location he understands personally. The original remains stronger because the setting and character history are connected. What Olympus Has Fallen does better than most of these comparisons is distribute authority. Mike has access but no formal command. Trumbull has command but no access. Asher has symbolic authority but limited freedom. Jacobs has operational knowledge but depends on Mike's observations. This arrangement makes communication part of the action, rather than a pause between physical encounters. Where it falls short is equally clear. Hart offers a richer hero-villain dynamic. Air Force One gives the president greater agency. White House Down provides more tonal variation and central chemistry. London Has Fallen delivers a broader, faster continuation for anyone who wants less confinement and more movement. Olympus Has Fallen sits between them as the most severe expression of the White House siege fantasy. If you love this film, watch Die Hard next for the foundational enclosed action structure and a more vulnerable hero. Choose Air Force One if the combination of presidential danger and personal rescue interested you most. Continue with London Has Fallen if Mike Banning's relentless competence is the main attraction. Try White House Down if you want nearly the same premise with more humor and partnership. If Olympus Has Fallen did not connect because it felt too glim or politically blunt, White House Down is the obvious alternative. If the implausibility of the takeover broke your engagement, DRR offers tighter spatial logic and more carefully escalating obstacles. If you wanted a more character-centered political thriller rather than a siege fantasy, In the Line of Fire provides a stronger exploration of aging, guilt, protection, and the psychological costs of Secret Service duty. Placed beside these films, Olympus Has Fallen does not win every category. Its special strength is commitment. It believes completely in the emotional force of a fallen symbol and in Mike Banning as a human mechanism capable of restoring it. To understand why that image connected with many moviegoers in 2003, we now need to step outside the building and examine the cultural world waiting beyond its gates. Olympus Has Fallen arrived in March 2013, but its emotional foundation had been developing in American cinema for more than a decade. Large-scale action films were still processing fears about attacks on familiar institutions, failures of intelligence, compromised security, and the possibility that advanced defensive systems could create confidence without eliminating vulnerability. The White House was therefore more than a convenient location. It concentrated several anxieties into one image. It represented political continuity, military authority, national identity, and the promise that someone remained in control during a crisis. By imagining that location captured, the film could trigger fear without spending much time explaining what had been lost. The building already carried the meaning. The geopolitical framing also belonged unmistakably to its period. Tensions surrounding North Korea were prominent in international news, and the film converted that real uncertainty into a highly simplified fictional threat. It did not attempt a careful portrait of Korean politics or history. It used recognizable headlines as emotional fuel for an American siege fantasy. That distinction matters. Olympus Has Fallen should not be treated as a realistic explanation of international conflict. Its adversaries are constructed to produce immediate clarity rather than political understanding. The film's world divides rapidly into protectors, captives, betrayers, and attackers. That simplicity serves the action, but it also dates the movie because modern audiences may be more sensitive to how quickly geopolitical complexity becomes a one-dimensional villain mechanism. The fact that White House Down appeared only months later makes 2013 especially revealing. Two major productions independently reached theaters with the same basic national nightmare, America's central political residence under organized attack. That coincidence suggests the image itself had unusual cultural power. The White House was not simply a building filmmakers wanted to destroy. It was a stage on which audiences could rehearse fears about institutional fragility. The two movies then offered different emotional responses. White House Down used humor, partnership, and blockbuster playfulness to make the nightmare manageable. Olympus Has Fallen used force, sacrifice, and restoration. One reassured you through personality, the other reassured you through the return of a disciplined protector. Their shared premise exposed the anxiety, their tonal differences offered separate methods of surviving it. Critics and general audiences reacted differently to Fuqua's method. Critical reception was mixed, with reviewers often recognizing the film's tension, Butler's commitment, and Fuqua's firm direction, while objecting to the screenplay's familiarity. Political bluntness, harsh violence, and strained plausibility. Its critical averages settled around the middle rather than suggesting broad enthusiasm. Moviegoers were more receptive. The film received a strong audience grade during its theatrical release, and its commercial performance exceeded cautious expectations. It earned roughly $170 million worldwide against a reported production budget of about $70 million. The result was not the scale of the decade's largest superhero successes, but it was enough to prove that Mike Banning and the premise had franchise value. The critical audience gap is easy to understand. Professional criticism often evaluates originality, thematic nuance, political framing, and filmmaking limitations alongside immediate entertainment. Olympus Has Fallen exposes weaknesses in several of those areas. Its structure openly resembles earlier enclosed action films, its adversary lacks depth, and its symbolism rarely invites uncertainty. Many action fans were asking a different question. Does the film create pressure, establish a hero worth following, and deliver the promised siege with conviction? For a significant portion of its audience, the answer was yes. Butler's performance gives the movie a stable center, and Fuqua rarely appears embarrassed by the material. That confidence can matter more in this genre than originality alone. Its awards history reflects the same divide. Olympus Has Fallen was never positioned as immediate prestige contender, and it did not become known for collecting important film awards. That absence is unsurprising. The screenplay, politics, and visual effects were too uneven for broad awards attention. While action craftsmanship is frequently under-recognized and less attached to a more prestigious production. If one element deserved greater acknowledgement, it was the coordination required to sustain the White House assault as a readable sequence. The scene combines performers, vehicles, physical effects, digital extensions, sound, editing, and multiple locations without completely losing the causal chain. Butler's physical performance also deserved recognition within the action genre, not because it was unusually dramatic, but because he made efficient movement carry character information. The movie's later life has depended less on awards than on repeat accessibility. Its direct premise works well on television, digital rental, and streaming services because you can understand the conflict quickly even if you enter with no knowledge of the franchise. The title itself functions like a complete invitation. You know the scale, the location, and the kind of danger being promised. Home viewing has also softened some of the film's original cultural weight. In 2013, the image of the White House under assault could dominate discussion. Over time, many people discovered the movie primarily as the first might-burning adventure. The national nightmare became franchise origin. The personal protector gradually became more culturally durable than the political scenario surrounding him. That shift explains why the film can be rediscovered even when its politics feel dated. Mike's emotional structure remains simple and portable. A capable person believes one failure has ended his usefulness, then receives an opportunity to act under pressure again. You do not need to share the film's political instincts to recognize the appeal of recovering purpose after guilt. Some elements feel timeless because the siege architecture is timeless. Limited information, divided authority, a hidden defender, hostages under pressure, and a location transformed into a maze can work in almost any period. The central tension between formal power and practical access also remains strong. A person with the highest title may still depend on someone with immediate knowledge. Other elements belong firmly to the early 2010s. The digital destruction carries the visual texture of its era. The geopolitical framing favors broad fear over cultural complexity. The patriotism is direct and largely unexamined. Even the idea of one physically dominant action hero restoring institutional order reflects a specific kind of post-crisis reassurance. Olympus Has Fallen is therefore neither completely timeless nor trapped in 2013. Its surface threat is historically marked, but its emotional mechanism continues to function. Symbols fail, systems become confused. A person dismissed by authority discovers that responsibility can exist without permission. That lasting mechanism encouraged people to look beyond the film's literal plot and develop interpretations of what Olympus truly represents, whether Mike's rescue is primarily national or psychological, and whether the building's fall begins long before the visible assault. One of the strongest audience interpretations is that Olympus does not refer only to the White House. It represents the American belief in protected power. Under this reading, the building's physical takeover is merely the visible proof of a collapse that has already happened in planning, trust, and imagination. Olympus falls because the institution cannot picture itself as vulnerable until vulnerability becomes unavoidable. The film strongly supports this interpretation. Its most important reversals involve protective things becoming dangerous. A trusted identity hides betrayal. A secure room becomes confinement. A defensive system becomes part of Khan's objective. A reassigned agent becomes the most valuable person available. These are not random twists. They repeatedly separate an object's official purpose from the function it performs under pressure. A second interpretation treats the entire siege as a psychological repetition of the bridge accident. Mike is again placed inside a crisis where President Asher and his family face danger. Time is disappearing, and no available choice can guarantee everyone's safety. The national emergency becomes an enlarged version of the moment Mike has been reliving privately. This reading also holds up. Mike's redemption is not created by achieving a perfect rescue. It comes from entering responsibility again despite knowing that training cannot eliminate loss. The siege does not allow him to erase the bridge. It allows him to respond differently to the belief that the bridge ended his usefulness. That distinction gives the action emotional meaning. Some people extend this theory further and argue that Mike is driven primarily by guilt rather than patriotism. The evidence partly supports that claim but primarily may be too narrow. His immediate connection to Usher and Connor clearly personalizes the mission. However, Mike also protects officials with whom he has no intimate relationship and continues after his own survival would be easier to prioritize. Guilt opens the door, but duty carries him through it. A third interpretation focuses on President Asher's decision to remove Mike from the protective detail. Was it a professional security judgment or an emotional inability to remain near the man associated with his wife's death? The film never turns this into a direct accusation, which leaves room for debate. The emotional explanation is persuasive. Mike made the only decision available to save Asher, so treating him as professionally unfit would be difficult to justify based only on the accident. His reassignment appears connected to grief and association. Seeing Mike may force Asher to remember both the loss and the terrible necessity of being the person who survived. Yet it would be unfair to interpret Asher's choice as simple punishment. Leaders and protectors depend on trust, emotional stability, and the ability to function in close proximity. Both men carry trauma from the same moment. Separation may have been less an official verdict on Mike's skill than an attempt to keep unresolved pain from entering daily presidential protection. The film supports ambiguity more than blame. The most interesting symbolic theory concerns Cerberus. In mythology, Cerberus guards the entrance to the underworld. In the film, the name belongs to a system intended to protect America from misuse of its own nuclear arsenal. Yet Kang tries to turn that safeguard into an instrument of destruction. This suggests that the deepest threat is not an enemy's weapon. It is American power reversed against the nation that created it. Kang cannot produce destruction on the scale he desires through the forces he brings into the White House. He needs access to the machinery already buried within Olympus. The fortress contains the possibility of its own annihilation. That interpretation is strongly supported by the plot and by the title. Olympus falls completely when its internal mechanisms no longer distinguish protection from destruction. Mike's final objective is therefore not simply to defeat an outside attacker. He must stop the institution's own power from completing the attacker's intention. Another recurring theory argues that Forbes could not have acted alone and that his betrayal implies a wider conspiracy inside American security. On a realistic level, the scale of Kang's access might seem to require additional assistance. As a theory about the actual story, however, the evidence is weak. The film gives no clear sign of another hidden collaborator after Forbes is exposed. This theory grows from a plausibility gap rather than deliberate foreshadowing. Because the takeover requires so many accurate assumptions, people naturally imagine unseen help to make the operation credible. Yet the screenplay treats Forbes as the answer, not the entrance to a larger mystery. The absence of follow-up evidence makes the conspiracy interpretation interesting but unsupported. A final reading sees Mike and Kang as opposing responses to loss. Both are motivated by earlier suffering. Kang converts grief into destruction directed at an entire nation. Mike initially turns grief inward, allowing it to remove him from purpose, but eventually converts it into protection. One man believes pain grants permission to spread pain. The other learns that pain can deepen responsibility. The comparison works thematically, even though the screenplay develops Mike far more fully. It explains why their conflict is larger than patriotism against revenge. They represent two movements away from trauma, outward toward punishment or forward towards service. Of all these interpretations, the strongest are the symbolic fall of institutional competence, the siege as Mike's second bridge, and Cerberus as protection reversed into danger. Each is supported by repeated choices, rather than one isolated detail. The broader conspiracy theory is weaker because it solves a logical problem without receiving evidence from the film itself. Together, these readings reveal what lies beneath the action. Olympus Has Fallen is obsessed with systems that cannot guarantee safety, choices that cannot prevent pain, and people who must decide what loss will turn them into. That is the compartment we open next. Beneath the siege, Olympus Has Fallen is really about the difference between protection and control. Mike spends his life protecting people, but the opening teaches him that protection cannot guarantee a perfect outcome. Kang tries to achieve absolute control, yet his plan constantly depends on frightened people reacting exactly as he expects. Both men confront uncertainty. The difference is what they do with it. Mike eventually accepts that responsibility does not mean controlling every consequence. It means acting with care when consequences cannot be fully controlled. That is a difficult lesson because guilt often creates an impossible standard. After a painful failure, you may tell yourself that if you had been stronger, faster, or more alert, nothing bad would have happened. The belief feels like accountability, but it can become another form of denial. It imagines that one person should have possessed power no human being actually has. The bridge accident traps Mike inside that belief. He made a necessary choice, but necessity does not protect him from grief. His mind keeps measuring the life saved against the life lost, as though courage should have created an outcome without sacrifice. When the White House crisis begins, he is not given proof that he can control everything. He is given another opportunity to act without that proof. That is why his return matters emotionally. Mike does not recover by forgetting the past. He carries the past into a new decision and refuses to let it make him passive. The film's most human idea is that healing may not feel like becoming innocent again. Sometimes healing means accepting that pain will remain while purpose returns beside it. The White House functions as the physical symbol of the same lesson. It appears to promise control on a national scale. Guards, procedures, communication networks, protected rooms, and formal chains of command create the impression that every danger has an answer. The assault reveals that these systems can reduce risk without abolishing uncertainty. This does not make institutions meaningless. It makes humility necessary. A system becomes most vulnerable when its confidence prevents it from imagining failure. Olympus falls because too many protective layers are treated as permanent facts rather than mechanisms requiring people to notice, question, and adapt. The recurring movement between high and low spaces reinforces that idea. The title invokes a mountain associated with gods, distance, and elevation. Political leaders occupy the highest symbolic positions in the country. Yet the decisive struggle moves downward into restricted corridors, concealed infrastructure, and the emergency bunker beneath the public building. Power descends from image into mechanism. The higher the title, the more dependent the person becomes on hidden systems and unseen workers. The film repeatedly strips away elevation until leadership is reduced to human choices made in confined rooms. Olympus may look powerful from a distance, but its survival depends on people operating in places the public never sees. Doors carry a similar meaning. A door can protect, imprison, conceal, or reveal depending on who controls it. Mike's knowledge allows him to read doors differently from the attackers. He sees routes where others see barriers and danger where others see security. The film uses architecture to make a simple human point. The meaning of any structure depends on the knowledge and intention of the person using it. Uniforms and titles are another recurring pattern. Mike loses his place on the presidential detail, but he does not lose the habits of protection. Forbes retains the knowledge associated with that word, but abandons its responsibility. Trumbull receives presidential authority because procedure requires continuity, yet he must grow into the emotional weight of decisions made under incomplete information. The film therefore separates identity from position. A title can authorize action, but it cannot create character. A uniform can identify duty, but it cannot guarantee loyalty. Mike becomes the clearest protector at the exact moment when he lacks the official status normally used to define him. That idea reaches beyond action cinema. Many people understand the fear of losing the role that made them feel valuable. A job ends, a relationship changes. One mistake becomes the story others remember. Suddenly, the skills and care you still possess appear to have nowhere to go. Mike's situation is exaggerated, but the emotional experience is familiar. His journey suggests that purpose is not always returned through approval. Sometimes it returns when circumstances ask what you can still give. Mike does not wait until every person from his past agrees that he has healed. He recognizes need and responds. The action is fantastical, but the principle is grounded. Usefulness can survive rejection. President Asher's journey explores a different form of helplessness. He begins surrounded by the visible signs of authority, then discovers that leadership may continue after control disappears. He cannot command the physical space, but he can still decide what kind of pressure will shape his choices. The film tests whether leadership is possession of power or responsibility toward people when power has been limited. Trumbull faces the same question from the opposite direction. He gains formal power during the crisis, yet that power arrives without direct access to the most important location. He must decide through other people's knowledge. His calm is not certainty. It is a discipline required to keep uncertainty from becoming reckless action. Kong represents the destructive answer to vulnerability. His grievance is attached to real pain within the fiction, but he interprets pain as permission to erase distinctions between responsibility and innocence. He transforms loss into a demand that strength has experienced greater loss. The film does not explore his psychology deeply, yet the contrast with Mike remains meaningful. Both men have reasons to believe the world failed them. Mike chooses service after isolation. Can chooses domination after grievance. One tries to prevent pain from spreading. The other treats spreading pain as proof of power. Their conflict is not merely between nations, it is between two ways of allowing injury to shape identity. Cerberus gathers all these themes into one symbol. It is designed as protection divided among responsible authorities and hidden within the deepest part of national security. Yet under pressure it can be reversed. The system has no morality of its own. It becomes protective or destructive according to the human intention moving through it. That may be the film's most valuable meaning. Strength is never permanently good simply because it was created for defense. Institutions, technology, access, and authority must remain connected to judgment. When judgment disappears, protection can become the mechanism of danger. The phrase Olympus has fallen finally describes several collapses at once. A building loses security. A government loses immediate control. A protector loses his professional identity. A president uses the illusion that authority guarantees safety, yet falling is not presented as the end. It is the condition that reveals what was holding everything up. Might does not restore Olympus because he is beyond fear of failure. He restores it because failure taught him the cost of responsibility and did not persuade him to abandon it. That is the film's emotional center. Resilience is not the denial of damage. It is the choice to remain responsible after damage has changed you. That idea carried beyond one movie. Mike Banning became a continuing action figure. The Fallen formula expanded into sequels and television, and the first film helped prove that a hard-edged, star-driven political thriller could still grow into a franchise during the superhero era. Olympus Has Fallen did not reinvent the enclosed action thriller, but it proved that the structure could still support a modern franchise without superheroes, fantasy mythology, or unestablished intellectual property. Its foundation was almost old-fashioned. One movie star, one vulnerable institution, one concentrated emergency, and one hero whose professional competence formed the main attraction. That mattered in 2013. Large-scale studio filmmaking was increasingly dominated by comic book properties, young adult adaptations, animated brands, and effects-heavy worlds designed for multiple installments. Olympus Has Fallen offered a different franchise model. It began with a direct action premise, succeeded commercially, and allowed audience response to Mike Banning to create the larger identity afterward. The first and clearest legacy is therefore the Has Fallen series itself. London Has Fallen arrived in 2016, reuniting Gerard Butler, Aaron Eckhart, Morgan Freeman, Angela Bassett, Radha Mitchell, and other returning cast members while moving the crisis to a broader international setting. The sequel changed the mechanism from defending one enclosed building to surviving movement through a threatened city. Angel Has Fallen followed in 2019 and altered the formula again. Instead of placing Mike inside another occupied landmark, it made him the suspected threat and forced him to operate while being pursued. Morgan Freeman's Alan Trumbull moved into the presidency, giving the character's earlier command role a direct continuation. Those sequels demonstrate what the original film truly created. The franchise was not ultimately tied to the White House. It was tied to Mike Banning as a protector who remains effective when official systems become unreliable. Locations, political roles, and threats could change as long as Butler carried the same combination of exhaustion, loyalty, and physical determination. The universe later expanded to television through Paris Has Fallen, which shifted attention toward different central characters while preserving the brand's political action identity. That expansion confirmed that Has Fallen had become more than the title of one Gerard Butler film. It became a reusable promise, a protected political structure when failed, forcing individuals to operate inside the gap between formal security and immediate danger. The naming pattern is part of the legacy. Has Fallen communicates collapse before any plot details are known. It identifies the threatened symbol while promising that the story begins when ordinary protection ends. The phrase is simple enough to travel across locations and formats, which is one reason the brand could continue even when Olympus itself no longer remained the setting. Gerard Butler's career also absorbed the success of Mike Banning. He had already established himself as a forceful screen presence, but Olympus Has Fallen strengthened his identity as the center of hard-edged action thrillers aimed at adult audiences. The role depends less on youthful invincibility than on weathered competence. Mike looks increasingly exhausted by the work, yet exhaustion never removes his willingness to continue. That quality helped to define a durable branch of Butler's latest screen persona. He became especially convincing as the man you place inside a failing system when calm authority and physical commitment are both required. The appeal is not elegance, it is reliability under worsening conditions. The film's broader influence should not be exaggerated. It did not create the die-hard in a location structure, nor did it cause Hollywood to discover political siege stories. Air Force One. In the Line of Fire. executive decision, and many earlier thrillers had already explored vulnerable leaders and protected spaces. Even the same year arrival of White House Down shows that Olympus Has Fallen was part of a larger creative movement rather than the sole source of it. Its achievement was commercial reinforcement. It showed that a serious, forceful version of this material could survive mixed reviews, attract a substantial audience, and generate long-term franchise value. It reminded producers that a recognizable actor and a clear action contract could sometimes matter more than a universally admired screenplay. The film's reputation has remained remarkably consistent. It has not undergone a major transformation into a critical classic, and its flaws have become more visible with time. The geopolitical simplification feels dated. Some digital effects reveal their age. The security logic still invites disbelief, and Kang remains less dimensional than the story requires. Yet the strengths have also survived. Fuqua's direction gives the initial assault urgency. Butler remains completely believable as Mike. The supporting cast adds authority. The emotional bridge between professional failure and recovered purpose provides more character structure than many imitators would have attempted. For action fans, the film has become a dependable example of muscular early 2010s teenage studio entertainment. It knows the sensation it wants to create and reaches that sensation without embarrassment. That confidence gives it repeat value even when you can see the machinery working. Its place in film history is therefore modest but real. Olympus Has Fallen is not a movie that transformed action cinema. It is the movie that turned one of the oldest action formulas into a surprisingly durable modern political franchise. It arrived as one half of an unusual White House double feature and emerged as the version that generated the longer continuing brand. The Blue Trail has now reached its final compartment. A phrase announcing national collapse became the foundation of a franchise because the film understood that people were not returning only to watch a building fall. They were returning to watch Mike Banning enter the broken mechanism and force it to function again. The remaining question is exactly how the ending completes that promise. The false escape, Cerberus activation, Mike's final confrontation with Kang, and the restoration of presidential authority connect every earlier clue. From this point forward, nothing stays hidden. Alright, full spoilers from this point. If you haven't seen the film yet, close this now. Go watch it and come back when you're ready. Trust me, you'll want to experience it fresh. The ending begins taking shape long before Mike reaches the bunker. Kang's public demands create the impression that his primary objective is forcing the United States to withdraw its military forces from the Korean Peninsula. That goal is politically useful, but it is also as clean. While Trumbull and the command center focus on the demand they can see, Kang pressures the captured officials for the 3 authorization codes connected to Cerberus. The name Cerberus is a deliberate clue. In Greek mythology, Cerberus is the multi-headed guardian of the underworld. The film system is protected by 3 separate codes held by President Asher, Secretary Macmillan, and Admiral Honig. The 3-part authorization resembles the creature's traditional 3 heads, while the system itself guards access to catastrophic power buried beneath the visible world. The symbolism contains a dark verso. A guardian should prevent destruction from escaping. Kang turns the guardian toward the people it was designed to protect. His plan is not to launch American nuclear weapons at another country. He intends to use Cerberus to trigger catastrophic destruction within the United States, converting the nation's own arsenal and safety mechanism into the source of devastation. That completes one of the film's central patterns. Kang succeeds by reversing functions. Diplomatic protection hides hostile intent. A secure bunker becomes a prison. Forbes converts security knowledge into betrayal. Cerberus changes from safeguard to threat. Every layer of Olympus is attacked through its intended purpose. President Asher initially allows Macmillan and Honig to surrender their codes because he believes his own portion will remain secure. His choice is motivated by compassion. He wants to prevent further suffering in the room and trusts that one remaining code will preserve the barrier. The flaw is not weakness, it is certainty. Asher assumes the last mechanism cannot fail because it has been designed not to fail. Kang does not need Asher to surrender voluntarily. Once he possesses the first two codes, his technical team can concentrate on obtaining the final authorization to the system itself. This reveals that the three-code structure is only as strong as the assumption that no enemy will ever control the protected environment long enough to attack it from inside. Mike recognizes that Kang's visible escape plan does not fit the evidence. Kang stages a helicopter departure and creates the appearance that he, Asher, and the remaining hostages have been destroyed. From the outside, the explosion appears to end both the rescue mission and the immediate occupation. It is a brutal deception because it uses the government's dependence on visible confirmation against it. The false escape repeats the mechanism used during the takeover. People respond to the image presented in front of them while the true objective moves somewhere else. The assault appeared to be primarily external while betrayal was already operating inside. Kang's demands appear to be the purpose while Cerberus remained hidden. Now the helicopter appears to contain the essential players while Kang and Asher remain below. Mike refuses the visible conclusion because he understands Kang's priorities. If Kang had spent the entire operation moving towards Cerberus, he would not abandon that objective at the moment of apparent victory. Mike follows intention rather than spectacle. That reasoning takes him toward the bunker, where the story reduces its national scale to the final physical relationship among Mike, Kang, and Asher. By the time Mike arrives, Kang has activated Cerberus and is preparing to leave with the president. The system begins moving toward irreversible destruction. The White House is no longer merely occupied. It has become the control point from which American power is being directed inward. Olympus has fallen in the fullest sense because its deepest protective mechanism now obeys the person who captured it. Mike eliminates the remaining resistance and confronts King directly. The final fight is deliberately stripped of the distance scale that defined the assault. There are no grand political speeches capable of resolving the conflict. Two men struggle at close range, while Asher remains in immediate danger and the Cerberus countdown continues. The confrontation completes the contrast between Mike and Kang. Both men have built their actions around loss, but Kang believes suffering gives him the right to multiply suffering. Mike has learned that suffering increases his responsibility to prevent it. Kang wants the world to carry his wound. Mike carries his own wound so other people do not have to. Mike defeats King, but physical victory does not end the crisis. Cerberus remains active. This is an important structural choice because it prevents the antagonist's death from becoming a magical solution. Kang has already placed destruction inside a system that can continue without him. Mike must now work with Trumbull and the command center to stop the mechanism itself. That cooperation resolves the film's divided authority structure. Mike has physical access to the terminal. Trumbull and his team possess the information and command support needed from outside. Neither side can succeed alone. The government is restored not when one man replaces the institution, but when the person inside and the authority outside finally operate as a connected system. Cerberus is deactivated before the disaster completes. The timing is designed for maximum action thriller relief, yet the meaning is more interesting than the countdown. Mike has not only rescued Asher, he has stopped protection from becoming destruction. The hidden machinery of Olympus has been returned to its original purpose. Mike then helps the dead president leave the damaged White House. This image mirrors the opening in a crucial way. On the bridge, Mike saves Asher but cannot prevent Margaret's loss. He walks away emotionally destroyed because Survivor feels incomplete. At the end, he again carries responsibility for Asher's life, but this time he does not allow the weight of everyone he could not save to erase the value of the person he did. The ending does not claim that the earlier tragedy has been corrected. Margaret remains gone and the losses during the attack remain real. Mike's redemption comes from accepting that protection is meaningful even when it cannot produce a world without grief. He can honor the people lost without treating his own continued usefulness as a betrayal of them. The damaged White House also changes meaning as Mike and Asher emerge. At the beginning of the siege, visible destruction announces institutional humiliation. At the end, the same damaged structure becomes evidence that survival does not require an untouched symbol. The building can be broken and still remain part of a functioning nation. President Asher later addresses the country and frames the attack as a test of national resilience. The speech is direct and patriotic, matching the film's larger emotional language. It does not deeply question the failures that allowed the crisis. Its purpose is restoration. The nation has seen its most protected image fall, so the president must give that image a new meaning. Vulnerability has been exposed, but continuity survives. Mike returns to presidential protection, completing the professional arc. Yet the reinstatement is less important than the choice he made before receiving it. He entered the White House without knowing whether success would restore his career. His duty preceded his reward. The official role simply catches up with the identity he had already reclaimed. There is no post-credit scene establishing the sequels. The film closes its immediate story without teasing another attack or introducing a future enemy. That makes sense because Olympus Has Fallen was built to function as a complete thriller. The franchise emerged from the commercial strength of Mike Banning rather than from an unfinished ending. Several early details now carry additional meaning. Connor's knowledge of hidden spaces foreshadows the importance of understanding the building beneath its official appearance. Forbes proves that access without loyalty is more dangerous than force without access. The three Cerberus codes echo the three-headed mythological guardian. Gang stage escape repeats the film's obsession with misleading surfaces. Mike's movement downward toward the bunker turns the title's Divine Mountain into a descent toward an American underworld. My personal reaction is that the ending works because it is emotionally cleaner than it is logically perfect. The Cerberus mechanism pushes credibility, the countdown is familiar, and Mike's victory arrives with the certainty expected from the genre. Yet the film has prepared the emotional conclusion carefully enough that the familiarity does not feel empty. The true payoff is not Kang's defeat. It is Mike walking out beside Asher without allowing the past to remain the only story of his service. The clue that began as a declaration of collapse becomes a revelation about resilience. Olympus is never restored to innocence. It is restored to function, and Mike is too. Olympus Has Fallen earns a personal rating of 7.3 out of 10. That score reflects a film that understands its strongest qualities and commits to them without hesitation. It is tense, forceful, clearly structured, and anchored by Gerard Butler at exactly the right level of intensity. Antoine Fuqua gives the crisis physical weight, while the supporting cast prevents the political command scenes from becoming empty exposition. The film works best when it treats the White House as both a symbol and a machine. Public rooms represent authority, hidden systems create vulnerability, and Mike's knowledge allows him to move between those two identities. The clue that began with the word fallen eventually reveals the entire design. Olympus collapses because people trust its visible strength while Kang targets the mechanisms underneath it. Gerard Butler is the central reason to watch. Mike Banning is not written with enormous psychological complexity, but Butler gives him discipline, guilt, loyalty, and convincing physical purpose. His redemption is communicated through action rather than explanation. He does not ask the past to forgive him. He proves that the past has not removed his capacity to protect others. The movie loses points for credibility, political simplification, uneven visual effects, and an antagonist who deserves more depth. Several security failures must align too perfectly, and Mike's later success sometimes feels more certain than suspenseful. Supporting characters such as Leah and Dean Jacobs could have been given more influence, while Forbes represents a missed opportunity for a richer moral contrast. Yet those problems do not erase the film's command of momentum. The White House assault remains an effective piece of action construction. The divided authority among Mike, Trumbull, Asher, and Jacobs creates a strong dramatic system, and the ending pays off the connection between personal guilt and institutional recovery. You should watch Olympus Has Fallen if you enjoy serious action thrillers, enclosed rescue missions, political emergencies, highly trained protagonists, and stories built around one person functioning after a larger system fails. It is especially suited to you if Gerard Butler's weathered action persona carries more appeal than polished superhero spectacle. You may not connect with it if strict procedural realism is essential, if blunt patriotic imagery pushes you away, or if you want international politics explored with nuance. The film asks you to accept its exaggerated premise quickly. If you spend the entire runtime testing every security decision against reality, its momentum will struggle to survive. For most people discovering it now, streaming is the right way to watch. A large screen and strong sound still improve the initial assault, but the film's enclosed interiors and direct narrative also work well at home. If you already enjoy the Has Fallen series or regularly revisit films such as Air Force One and Die Hard, owning it makes sense because its clarity gives it easy repeat value. Olympus Has Fallen is not a flawless action classic, and it does not need to be mistaken for one. It is a confident political siege thriller with a powerful star, a memorable central image, and enough emotional structure to give the destruction meaning. The White House rises again, but Mike's real victory is discovering that a fallen protector can still choose to stand. Every film is a box. And we opened this one together. Thank you for staying with me as we opened every compartment of Olympus Has Fallen. From the first fracture on that frozen ridge to the damaged halls beneath America's most protected symbol. If you enjoyed this kind of evidence-driven movie breakdown, leave a like and subscribe to the Film Box. It helps us keep opening films beyond the surface, following the clues, testing the mechanisms, and finding the meaning hidden beneath the spectacle. Now I want to hear your verdict. Is Mike Panning's return truly a story of redemption, or does the film make him so capable that his earlier guilt disappears too easily? And if you had to choose one White House thriller, would you take Olympus Has Fallen or White House Down? Share your answer in the comments, along with the detail you think changes the film most once you notice it. The best movie conversations begin when two people can look inside the same box and discover something completely different. Every film is a box, and we've only just started opening them. That's the Film Box. See you in the next one.